Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient city hidden underground in Mexico, which may give a better understanding of the Maya civilization.
The Maya civilization vanished, leaving behind only ruins and mysteries. Now, a stunning DNA test has finally exposed their true origins, and the reality is far more terrifying than we imagined. Deep in a sealed chamber, scientists found remains that are not what they seem.
They die and they revive again every day to remind humans that they got to keep the balance, maybe by making offerings and rituals specific to the underworld.
Their DNA contains an impossible sequence, a code that rewrites our understanding of human history. This isn't just a new discovery. It's the unraveling of a dark secret, one that suggests the Maya were connected to something else. The obsidian anomaly. It all started in the Petén Basin of northern Guatemala. This is one of the thickest, least explored parts of the entire Mayan world. A research team was working on a restoration program scanning the foundations of collapsed temples near the massive city of El Mirador. The ground-penetrating radar showed an anomaly, a geometric void, perfectly circular, buried more than 40 feet below the pyramid's foundation. You see, nature doesn't build in perfect circles. At first, they thought it was just a natural cave, but as they dug, they hit a layer of stone that was wrong. The blocks were smoother, cut with perfect precision and bound together by a strange adhesive compound that was harder than modern cement. Then they found it, a sealed doorway. A single massive slab of limestone. It had faint engravings, but they weren't Mayan. They didn't match any known script. Some looked like pre-Olmec shapes, while others seemed entirely alien. The team noted their instruments were acting up again. The slab was giving off weirdly low magnetic readings, as if it had metal inside the stone. After days of careful work, they finally breached the slab. A burst of compressed air hissed out. Inside was a circular chamber about 23 feet across. But the walls, they were coated in a black, glass-like substance. It looked like obsidian, but it absorbed the light from their lamps. It didn't reflect it. The air was cold, several degrees lower than the jungle outside, and it was completely unnaturally silent. And in the center, sitting on 3 stone pedestals, were the ancient remains of 3 individuals. They were seated cross-legged, surrounded by jade ornaments, polished metallic discs, and crystal fragments. What many overlooked at first was the state of preservation. The site was pristine, untouched by decay, which should be impossible in the tropical humidity. But the individuals themselves were the real mystery. Their skulls were elongated. Now we know the Maya practiced artificial head binding, but this was different. The bone density and symmetry suggested this wasn't artificial. This was genetic. But here's the kicker: the carbon dating. The team tested organic fibers from the chamber. The results came back at approximately 12,400 years before present. Let that sink in. This chamber and the people inside it were thousands of years older than the Maya civilization. They were older than the Olmec. They were from a time before history as we know it began in the Americas. This discovery alone would change the textbooks. But the thing nobody tells you is what happened when they took the remains back to the lab. They ran a DNA test, and what they found, what they unleashed, is the dark secret the title of this story is all about. The initial analysis was standard. The mitochondrial DNA belonged to haplogroup A2, which is common among indigenous peoples of the Americas. But then the deeper sequencing failed. Specific parts of the genome just wouldn't align with any known human data. They thought it was contamination, but the anomaly repeated. It was identical across all 3 individuals. They found it in the non-coding regions of the genome, the part scientists used to call junk DNA. They found a sequence, a repeating patterned motif. It was so precise, it wasn't random, it wasn't mutation, it was mathematical. When they mapped it, the pattern displayed a recurring ratio that perfectly approximated the Fibonacci progression. It was a code. This was impossible. This was a message hidden inside a strand of DNA from 12,400 years ago. They labeled the anomaly Sequence X473. It was part human, part something else. But this genetic code wasn't just a random message, it matched something else. Sequence X473. This is where the story gets truly unsettling. This wasn't just old DNA, it was active. Parallel tests at another university confirmed that these strange DNA strands, sequence X473, emitted faint biophotonic activity. When hit with ultraviolet light, they glowed. The wavelength of the light matched certain bioluminescent marine animals. Why? Why would human remains from a jungle chamber glow? The team compared the sequence against every global genetic database. No match. Not to any species, ancient or modern. It was a hybrid. It looked for all the world synthetic. And then they saw the connection. Researchers back at the dig site were enhancing the images of the glyphs carved on the outside of the chamber door. The spiral patterns, the star-like formations. They sent the patterns to the genetics lab. The lab team was stunned. The micro patterns in the DNA, the geometric configurations of the base pairs perfectly mirrored the spiral glyphs etched into the stone door. This was not a coincidence. This was design. The builders of this chamber 12,000 years ago somehow understood genetic engineering. They had encoded their sacred symbols into the very biology of the people inside. This is where a senior geneticist proposed a hypothesis so wild it was immediately classified. The sequence wasn't biology at all. It was data storage. The DNA was a biological hard drive. The idea was that this junk DNA was carrying non-biological information. When they translated the anomalous segments into binary code, the data produced repeating numerical constants. These constants corresponded to precise astronomical ratios, specifically the orbital period of Venus relative to Earth. This chamber wasn't a tomb, it was an archive. And the people inside weren't just people, they were the books. They were living libraries, carrying the astronomical secrets of the universe in their genes. The isotopic signature of the calcium in their bones was also off. It suggested they had lived in an atmosphere with a slightly higher oxygen content, conditions not seen in that region for over 10,000 years. So, who were these people? An unknown branch of humanity? A lost pre-Mayan lineage? The truth, as it turns to, is even stranger. This genetic ghost, this sequence X473, didn't just belong to 3 individuals who perished 12,000 years ago. The geneticists ran one more test, a long shot. They compared the sequence to modern populations, and they got a hit. The sequence wasn't gone. It was just dormant, and it's still here, walking among us. Guardians of the Old Blood. The database lit up with a low-frequency match. It pointed to samples collected decades earlier for totally unrelated research. The samples came from a small cluster of isolated highland communities in the Yucatan Peninsula. This was the modern connection, the link between the impossible past and the living present. Teams were immediately sent back to these highland settlements. These populations live in difficult terrain far from major cities. They maintain ancient customs and oral traditions that have survived for centuries. The new DNA tests confirmed it. Faint, degraded traces of sequence X473 persisted among a small percentage of the individuals. The implications were staggering. Medically, the sequence seemed to influence cellular behavior in subtle ways. In the lab, cells containing X473 showed accelerated tissue repair and unusually high memory-related neural activity. These people had, for generations, shown an inexplicably high immunity to certain infections. But the cultural connection was the real bombshell. Anthropologists interviewing the village elders heard strange phrases. The elders spoke of being guardians of the old blood. Their oral histories, passed down for hundreds of generations, warned against intermarriage with outsiders, not for reasons of prejudice, but, as they said, to prevent a loss of balance. They were unknowingly preserving a genetic distinction. They were protecting the sequence. When the researchers showed the elders the enhanced images of the spiral glyphs from the 12,000-year-old chamber, several of them recognized it immediately. They called it the breath of the sky. This wasn't just a story, it was a genetic memory passed down from a time before the Maya. But the mystery of where this DNA came from was only getting deeper. As they looked at broader data, they found micro-fragments of it everywhere. Tiny, trace amounts in South Pacific Islanders, in northern Andean populations, and even in certain Arctic groups. The sequence didn't have a common ancestor. Phylogenetic models couldn't trace its origin. It didn't evolve. It just appeared. It looked for all the world like an insert, an intentional addition, a piece of code sporadically inserted into human populations all over the globe, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The picture was becoming clear. The DNA, the ancient individuals, the living descendants, they were all part of a single massive system. But what was the other part of the system? The DNA was the software. Where was the hardware? The answer, it turns out, was buried just a few miles away, and it was still active. A pulse from below. While the geneticists were chasing ghosts in the blood, the remote sensing teams found something else. A second anomaly, much, much bigger. Beneath the jungle canopy, hidden under layers of ancient ash and limestone, was a perfect symmetrical ring. It was massive, measuring roughly 300 feet across. This was no sinkhole. This was a structure. Core samples were extracted. What they found should not exist. The ring was made of alloyed materials, including titanium, vanadium, and iridium. These are metals that require incredibly high temperatures to process. The surrounding volcanic glass was fused with metallic particles, evidence of exposure to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. No pre-industrial society could do this. This wasn't a temple. This was a piece of advanced technology. But here's the kicker. The thing was humming. Magnetometric readings revealed the ring was emitting low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. They were faint, but they were regular. A stable pulse, repeating every 11 minutes, like clockwork. The team was baffled. What was this machine? An astronomical instrument? An energy source? The initial readings suggested it wasn't just on the ground, it went deep, deeper than their equipment could penetrate. This wasn't just a machine, it was a beacon. They decided to map the pulse pattern. They converted the electromagnetic frequency into a numerical ratio, and they nearly fell over. The pulse pattern from the 300-foot metallic ring perfectly matched the mathematical ratio of sequence X473. The machine and the DNA were connected. Let that sink in. A piece of buried, impossible technology was actively communicating with a unique genetic sequence found only in the local guardians of the old blood. They were two parts of the same system, resonating at the same frequency. This structure was, in effect, talking to the special DNA. This is when the theories went from lost civilization to something else entirely. What if the machine wasn't talking to the DNA, but powering it? Or what if the people were the power source? A living biological battery network designed to keep this ancient machine on standby. Or maybe the most terrifying theory of all, what if the ring wasn't sending a message, but an instruction? A command written in electromagnetism telling that special DNA to do something, to change, to activate. This is when they went back to the other artifacts from the first chamber. Specifically, a fractured jade tablet. The glyphs on it were finally translated. It was a star map, but it didn't show the sky from today. It showed the night sky from exactly 12,000 years ago. That date should send a shiver down your spine. 12,000 years. It's the exact time frame of the Younger Dryas. The moment a global cataclysm, maybe a comet impact, maybe a solar flare, wiped the slate clean and plunged the world into a final, brutal ice age. The map pointed to the Pleiades, a star cluster the Maya were obsessed with. No surprise there, but it also pointed to a second location, A spiral path connected our solar system to a dense region of interstellar dust within the Taurus constellation, an area about 1,500 light-years away. The tablet called this spot Chiyin Hall, or the Sky River. The team realized Chiyin Hall wasn't a destination. It was a corridor, a superhighway through the cosmos, a stable wormhole. The tablet referenced this spot in conjunction with symbols for arrival, teaching, and blood. The tablet's text spoke of the Bakab Chan, those who came in light, the Sky People. Now, put the pieces together. The Sky People arrived 12,000 years ago, just as the world is ending. They come not from Taurus, but through Taurus, using the Sky River. They find a planet on the brink of total collapse. They can't save the world, but maybe they can save a piece of it. What if they weren't just teachers? What if they were genetic engineers? They intervened. They built this massive 300-foot machine, this beacon, this genetic trigger, and buried it. Then they edited the DNA of the survivors. They inserted sequence X473, a genetic signature, an alarm clock. They created a bloodline to act as living custodians for a technology they couldn't take with them. A system left dormant, humming on low power for 12 millennia, waiting. Waiting for what? Their return? Or waiting for the day the descendants of those survivors were smart enough to find the machine and finally understand the message? So what happens when that ancient sequence fully reawakens? And are the Sky People who built it gone? Or are they on their way back? Let us know your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more secrets from the past.